Thank you, councillors. A few members of the public have arrived since the end of the extraordinary meeting. For their benefit, I will just go through the fire alarm procedures again. Should the fire alarm sound tonight, please can you evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear, behind you over there, and at the side of the council chamber behind me. Please go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Apologies for absence, Councillor Cubitt, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As before, Councillor Marks and Councillor Cherrett.
Councillor Gavin James.
Councillor Hussey and possibly Councillor Dunlop because he's not here yet.
Councillor Loney and Councillor Watts.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. When we come to the decisions which we have to make on members' remuneration, the monitoring officer has obtained a blanket dispensation for members to vote. So members here will have the chance to vote on that. It would be absolute nonsense if we hadn't. Councillor Cousins, you should say something.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 8A2 on the update sheet, paper E, Appendix A. At the bottom mentions Fainham House, which is where the AA are staffed. I am an employee there and have shares in the company. Therefore, I have sought advice. I have a non-direct pecuniary interest, and I will be taking part in the debate and taking part in the vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Jones.
Mr. Mayor, I have a peculiar interest in the local plan, being a member of BasingstokeGov Club, and I will be leaving the chamber, so I won't be taking any part whatsoever.
I'm sorry, but it's a bit dark out there to play now. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a personal interest in the local plan in terms of Park Farm. I'm not sure if it's current or not, so I will declare it for absolute transparency, and it is on my register of interests.
Now move on to item 3, minutes of the council meeting held on the 26th of February 2015, paper A. And before you all jump up and down, minute 5514B, Councillor Falconer did not replace Councillor Hussey on EPH. He replaced Councillor Peach. Any other points, or can we approve the minutes?
Mayor.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Minute 5414. Could I ask where the petition has gone, when it's going to be dealt with, please?
These are only as a matter of record, so if you have a query, I don't think this is the place for it. Just a moment. You can ask a question later when we get to the minutes of the individual meetings. However, we have an answer now, so we might as well take it.
Just to clarify, I did have a call from the officer today who said that he's prepared a draft report, and I didn't have time to call him back, I'm afraid. So I will do that tomorrow, and hopefully there will be a draft report out for members next week.
Okay, minutes approved. Announcements. First of all, in the heat of the moment, I called you all bastards. I apologise. You're not all bastards. Right, on a more serious note, Janet Traynor, a past mayoress, passed away on the 10th of March. The funeral took place on the 17th of March. I have written and sent condolences on behalf of all councillors, and I attended the funeral. Also, June Brandt, wife of past Mayor Keith Brandt, has asked that I let councillors know that Keith has been admitted to St Michael's Hospice for his final days. Unfortunately, June does not feel that she is able to make contact personally with all of his friends and colleagues still on the council with this update. It's a sad piece of news. I did visit Keith only the other day, and at that point he was still very chirpy, very full of himself, very much the Keith we all knew. And lastly, one last appeal for April the 17th. I would love to see as many councillors as possible come along and join me for the charity dinner at Audley's Wood. Chief Executive? No announcements. Questions from members of the public. Alan Ball, Chairman, Sherfield-on-Nodden Parish Council.
My question relates to the report on the Community Governance Review for Sherfield-on-Nodden being discussed later in this meeting, and in particular I would like to ask the Council if it agrees with me that the suggested name of Sherfield Park Parish Council is unsuitable and should be reconsidered. Around October 2013, the Sherfield-on-Nodden Parish Council requested that the CGR take place, and initial meetings took place with Karen Brimacombe, and the CGR process started in June 2014. The naming issue was discussed at the September 2014 meeting of the Sherfield-on-Nodden Parish Council in response to a direct request from Suzanne Smith, and the message returned was anything which does not include the word Sherfield. Following this, in my role as PC Chairman, I helped specify the role of the Working Party, which would assist the officers in the CGR process, and I repeated that the only constraint we wished to put on the name of the new parish was that it did not contain the word Sherfield. The main reason for this is to avoid confusion. Many Sherfield-on-Nodden residents have been accosted by lost delivery drivers looking for obscure road names, to which the inevitable response will be, "Oh, you don't want Sherfield-on-Nodden, Sherfield Park actually means Taylor's Farm." At the initial Working Party meeting in November, the name was discussed again, and the group suggested Loddon Valley PC was the recommendation of the Working Party going forward, along with several other alternatives to be offered in the Phase 2 consultation. The results of the consultation forms the basis of the report to be presented later, but the relevant item is presented as 76% of the responses from within Taylor's Farm favour Sherfield Park PC. However, I think this is misleading, and I would, working from the same raw data, present the fact as less than 6% of the electorate who will be affected by this decision actually voted for it. Less than 6%. A very different message. Also a requirement of the name is that it has to have some historical geographical connection with the area. Sherfield Park is in fact the marketing name for the development, and any connection with the park is tenuous to say the least. But more importantly, Sherfield Park is historically the name of a pre-existing area within Chinham. Does it make any sort of sense to give the parish the same name as an older established area in an adjacent parish? I would therefore restate my question. Given that both the Parish Council and the Working Party's recommendations appear to have been ignored, does the Council agree with me that the proposed name of Sherfield Park Parish Council is ill-advised and should be reconsidered? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. This is a matter for noting. No doubt members will take this into account when the item is going to be debated later on the agenda. Entitled to a supplementary, but only based on the answer I've just given you.
No requirement.
I'm sure you'll be staying for the debate. Petitions, we have none. Resignations and appointments. Are there any changes with members? Sorry, for once we are doing nothing. Appendix A. When I get there. I'll wait for Julie to sit down. Well, thank you very much for a speedy evacuation. I'll just ask the Acting Chief Executive what she thought of it.
We will prepare a report in due course, Mr Mayor, but I think from my observation it went well, although we will look at the lighting out perhaps at the side of the building, because that wasn't very easy to see where we were all going.
I think next time we might have some flames to illuminate us. Moving back to the agenda, item 7B, outside bodies, Appendix A. So it's only a few, so we'll run through them quickly. We have a vacancy on the Barlows Park Management Association. No interest. The Basingstoke Music Festival Committee. The Basingstoke Youth Action Trust, Enterprise First, Northern Road Safety Council, and Relate North and East Hampshire and Borders. No take up tonight. Item 8, reports for decision. Human Resources Committee held on the 9th of March. Pay policy statement for 15/16, paper B, page number 5422 of the minutes book. HR Committee recommends the pay policy statement to full council. Councillor Still, who chaired that meeting, to present.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have pleasure in presenting the minutes of the Human Resource Committee held on the 9th of March 2015. Thank you.
Is that agreed? Splendid. 8.2. Cabinet held on the 17th of March 2015. Local plan housing numbers and site allocations, paper E. Councillor Raphael to present.
Mr Mayor, it looks like I came back in just in time. But firstly, Mr Mayor, I'd like to propose the recommendations which seem to be on this addendum paper. And Mr Mayor, I stood before your predecessors on the 25th of July 2013 and the 27th of March 2014 and urged all members to allow the plan to go out for consultation. Each time, the majority of members, Mr Mayor, allowed that to happen. And after the last occasion, we got to see our inspector. And I stood before you in December of last year and explained that our plan remained on track and that we needed to make some adjustments. Well, I want to thank councillors for the tidy and careful and prompt way that they have considered those adjustments, getting them through committee, through to cabinet and to where we are now. Where we are now is that we have a recommendation that will allow our plan to be inspected in the autumn, and our plan should be in place sometime shortly thereafter. As members know, as a result of the meeting with the inspector in December, our plan is on track and is credible. Having a local plan in place, as we all know, is essential if we want to build the right homes in the right places and protect our green fields. However, things have changed since July of last year. Well, I should say even March of last year, I think it was, almost to the day, the 27th of March. Things have changed in this council since then. There are less people here, less over there, less over here, and less, well, there are a few more over there, actually, I can see. Then there's been quite a bit of change, and of course we've got a general and local elections coming up in just over a month's time. And unfortunately, Mr Mayor, there's sadly a real risk that this plan could be defeated tonight. It can only be passed if there is once again the coalition of the grown-ups working together between us, and the majority of us, and the Liberal Democrats. there is, Mr Mayor, unfortunately, a coalition that is against the local plan. On the one hand, there are councillors who wish to stand up for their own residents, which I fully respect and understand, and on the other hand, there are councillors who just wish to humiliate the Conservatives, whatever the cost to the borough, and that is the Labour Party. Unfortunately, there seem to be some councillors who want to do a bit of both, and that applies to some of the independents. So, members and Mr Mayor, you know what the carrot is, the benefits of having a local plan, and sadly I'm going to have to apply the stick. If this plan is defeated, then I'm advised that we'll have to withdraw the plan. It will have to go back to committee in June and will be the start of a 2-year cycle. And this will be the biggest local story going during the election, and everyone will blame everyone else. I'm looking over there. They're smiling. The Student Union corner of the Labour Party thinks this is great fun. Of course, we know why they love it, because they love this sort of politics. Well, let me tell them how it's going to play. And let me remind you that people vote on future fear, not necessarily of past problems. In Overton, the Liberal Democrats have already put out a leaflet blaming various people for the problems we're in, but I can tell you, they'll put out a leaflet against Councillor Tilbury if he's responsible for stopping this plan. Well, they'll still put it out. They'll still put it out. I'll tell you what will happen in Bramley. Bramley, which unfortunately has had far too much housing in recent years, imposed on it from central government. The same will happen there if Councillor Tomlin takes that decision. And to Councillor Bierman in Chinham. And people will make fun of the councillors in Oakley if they take the same decision, because I know that there are others who are interested in what they're going to be saying today. And so I appeal to all of you that if you can't vote for this plan because it hurts your residents, please, please then sit on your hands rather than vote for unrestricted development, which will hurt your residents even more. Because not only the sites that you're worried about now will be at risk of planning by appeal, but the other sites that will come out of the woodwork as speculative development thrives. And of course, all I would say, Mr Mayor, is if this plan is defeated, what will happen? Well, in the parliamentary seat of Basingstoke, who will be blamed? The Conservatives? No, they'll put a leaflet through the door. The Liberal Democrats will put the same leaflet through the door. UKIP will put the same leaflet through the door. And the Green Party, I'm sure you'll try. And who will they blame? Who will they blame? They'll blame the architect of its defeat, which will be Councillor Paul Harvey. He is responsible for if this plan gets defeated, and he will be linked to the party that brought the 945 housing target in the first place. So, we don't want that gift horse. We want you to approve the plan. Please approve the plan.
Are the recommendations seconded? Sorry? I'm still waiting for a seconder. Well, I've got you down to speak next anyway.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's that time of year and people often ask me what do I think is going to be the biggest party on May the 8th. The answer is a very simple one. It's the one that the Liberal Democrats will throw to celebrate our divorce from the Conservatives. It's not been an easy marriage. Mr Mayor, during the last 5 years they've cheated on us with Labour to block Lord's reform. And all the time they've been in bed with us, we know they've been thinking about UKIP. We may rebound into a relationship with the Labour Party, but I think they fancy the SNP. Despite our difficult relationship, I do think it's important tonight we join together once more for the sake of the children. And our local plan is what we're doing for our children. Now, Mr Mayor, there's a reality. If you invited all 60 councillors to go away and come back with their perfect local plan, you'd come back with 59 different local plans and UKIP wouldn't have bothered coming back again. This is one of those situations. I've lost my plot. These are one of those situations where you have to enter into discussions accepting nothing less than a good compromise. We waited too many years on developing the local plan. This was caused by war, civil war within the Conservative Party. First of all, they tried to hide many down, and when that failed, they played the numbers game. Despite supporting a policy of 300 affordable homes, and despite supporting a policy of 40% affordable, they refused to accept that 750 homes a year was the minimum that we could possibly consider. You'll notice, Mr Mayor, that once Many Down was in and 750 homes had been achieved, we were able to make rapid progress with the local plan because the Liberal Democrats were able to support it. Sadly, that delay means tonight we're looking at 850. That extra 100 homes has to be included, and the Tories will have to accept responsibility for that. The biggest challenge of our local plan, of course, is infrastructure. And I want to start planning the infrastructure now and finding the funding to support that infrastructure. The problem is you can't actually do much about infrastructure until you know the future shape of the borough. That's why, Mr Mayor, it's absolutely critical tonight that we pass the local plan. We can send a clear message to the inspector, who may accept the plan if we're united behind it, or we can send a mixed message to the inspector, which may result in further delay and possible rejection. So, Mr Mayor, if you really care about affordable housing, you have little choice but to support the local plan. If you really care about infrastructure, you have no choice but to support the local plan. If you, however, prefer planning by appeal, then of course you can vote against it.
Thank you. Councillor Bean.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've lived in Basingstoke my whole life. I was born here, I went to school here, I've had my children here, my son now goes to school here, and I own my own home in Basingstoke. I've seen our town change, grow and develop over the years. I grew up in Hatch Warren and remember playing in the very fields that my own house in Beggarwood now stands. I recognise the need for new housing, and I believe my residents do too. We have an ageing population who are living in their homes for longer, and a growing number of young people looking for their first home, whilst not forgetting those who are looking to move on and up the property ladder. What is important to my residents, however, is that any development is sustainable, has the necessary infrastructure to support it, and is of a high quality. As a newer member of this council, I have followed the local plan debate with interest. To me, it seems evident that we need a local plan in place to stop developers coming in and doing whatever they want, which can leave us with unsustainable developments which impede on residents' quality of life. Leaving out the journey to get here, we are where we are. The planning inspector has said that we need to identify a figure of around 850 houses per annum to form a sound and robust plan. This plan will be the first line of defence against developers putting in large numbers of planning applications without listening to local residents. So it is clear, we need houses and we need a plan. My residents want to see a local plan in place. They want to know where and when to expect development and to be reassured that these developments will be of the quality that they deserve and will add benefit to the whole community. They want to be reassured that their children will be able to find a place at a local school, a feeling I can sympathise with, and that they are able to get from A to B in a reasonable amount of time. I know that they want to see an end to the political barracking and delays. We need houses for the young people in our borough, but they must be built in the correct way in sustainable communities with the infrastructure to support them. We have a lot of developments coming our way on the west side of the town, and my residents rightly have concerns around infrastructure and sustainability. The addition of Hounsdon Fields only adds to this. South West Action Group has highlighted some very particular concerns around the traffic assessment, the majority of which I agree with. These concerns and issues will need to be addressed to ensure that these developments do not have a negative impact on my residents in Hatch Warren and Beggarwood, and indeed the other communities immediately surrounding them. We need to get this plan in place. I accept this. We have too much to lose if we don't. Without a plan, we will undoubtedly end up with poor developments which are not sustainable. We must ensure that all sites developed are of a high quality which meet all the necessary planning criteria. What is important to my residents is that if development is going to take place on the west side of Basingstoke, is that their quality of life is not harmed or impacted upon negatively. What this plan should achieve and ensure is that residents' quality of life is enhanced and improved as a result of high quality developments with the infrastructure and facility to support them. I will be supporting the recommendation.
Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Simply to start off, if I support this local plan, it's not without caution or concern, but simply the reality that with no local plan we leave ourselves open to more development and uncontrolled building in Basingstoke. A recent article in the housing press stated that councils with no local plan were building homes 35.9% faster. We must not leave residents of Basingstoke at risk of faster uncontrolled development. To support the plan, as frustrating as it may be, to not support the plan would be a disservice to our residents. If you are up for election, think carefully before you vote against this tonight. As your campaign literature may as well read, vote for me, I want uncontrolled and high levels of development in Basingstoke. My point today though, Mr Mayor, is not just right now, but looking to the future. Consider the changes in Basingstoke over the past decade, and the future over the next 15 years. What will Basingstoke look like? Rivers polluted, drinking water deteriorated, our open spaces and greenbelt gone, terrible pressures on the roads. Doctors' surgeries and schools unable to cope with numbers despite our best attempts to provide the infrastructure we need. This would be a Basingstoke we no longer recognise, lost all of its charm and character, and the greenbelt eradicated under concrete. In 10 to 12 years' time we will start looking at another local plan, and the conversation will be along the lines of, we need more houses to meet demand. We have a housing crisis. Will our response simply be, well, build more then? I personally hope not. We need to look ahead more carefully. Britain's population is increasing. We're the 5th most densely populated country in the world, just behind Bangladesh and South Korea. There is natural population growth, but then there is encouraged growth. And one could argue our current housing number is a result of past years of high levels of development, encouraging more and more people to live in Basingstoke. Next time, the local plan could be 1,500 homes per year. So consider the infrastructure as well. We don't have enough, and we probably can't build enough sufficiently, and it's simply too expensive, and no amount of SIL or 106 will plug that gap. Mr Mayor, the point of all of this is that I'm asking the councillors of this council to consider setting in place the analysis of Basingstoke and Dean, and request when this local plan is adopted that they undertake a capacity study. And I believe this is a wider national agenda to understand, but Basingstoke could lead the way and address the issue of how much is too much. In Australia they realise that they have a capacity, and their population probably is around about 30 million. In response, they have a population minister who's responsible for planning properly the infrastructure for needs, for housing needs, transport needs, and the regional needs. Australia has obvious restrictions to growth, but so do we. We have narrow roads that can't be made wider, flooding sewage that perhaps we can't mitigate against, and the River Loddon was already polluted beyond EU standards. These are real limitations that governments and inspectors could all too easily overlook. Building more is not necessarily everything. Shaping and designing sustainability is everything. If we have to build, then build more intelligently. If we simply cannot build at such a higher number, then we must be brave enough to say it. We must understand what development our town can handle, considering environmental factors, infrastructure needs, and natural limitations. Only then can we have a good argument with the future planning inspector of what we will build, where we will build it, and lead the way in the discussion rather than being prodded and poked by the inspector or the government to accept our fate. So I will be supporting the plan tonight, but I will be looking forward too, in the hope that we can grow with wise planned steps, lead in sustainability, and ultimately undertake a capacity study. Thank you.
Councillor Paula Baker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I too will support this local plan. I don't really like it, but I like planning by appeal even less. This plan has taken far too long to get to this stage. There are too many houses allocated in my own ward, in Overton. There should be stronger green policies. And following the inspector's exploratory meeting in December, we could and should, I think, have taken the opportunity then to make more use, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the M word again, of the opportunities that Manydown give us for increasing the number. And the one thing I would say that following the December meeting, I was very relieved that the requirements for villages, the number of houses to produce under neighbourhood planning, has not been changed. I think quite rightly, as the portfolio holder has said, that would have undermined the whole logic of neighbourhood planning to do that at this stage, with neighbourhood plans a long way ahead in development. So, yes, I don't really like it, but it's far better than wholesale planning by appeal and just lying down and letting the developers do whatever they want to do, wherever they want to do it. So, yes, I shall support the local plan and urge others to do so too.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will support and vote for the local plan, quite clearly, because we all need to vote and support this plan and get this plan through for our residents' sake. Now, it may not be exactly the plan that I want, and it may not be exactly the plan that my residents want, but as colleagues have already rehearsed and as I've stated on a number of occasions, this plan going through is vital. It is far better than the alternative, which will be planning by appeal, as colleagues have said, and years of uncertainty for our residents. To be a bit parochial for a while, on the western side of Basingstoke, close to my ward of Hatchwarren and Beggarwood, we're facing major new developments. On one side of the A30, up by Junction 7, we have the golf course, which is slated for about 1,000 homes. And on the other side, Hounsome Fields has just been added to the plan with a further 750. And if you add on Kennel Farm, which is coming forward now, next door, then that makes about 2,000 extra homes. The work that the South Western Action Group have done on our side of town, and they've looked at traffic amongst other things, has demonstrated that Hatchwarren and Beggarwood residents already have the longest peak hour journeys into town of any urban residents in Basingstoke. So clearly an additional 2,000 homes is going to impact on that and make those journeys even more difficult. So there are traffic issues which have to be addressed. In addition, of course, there are the other infrastructure issues, such as schools, doctors' surgeries, sewerage and so on and so forth. In fact, the school places are already so much under pressure in the area that our colleagues in Hampshire, in their wisdom, have designated Parkview School in Southam as the school for children who will be living in Kennel Farm. So clearly there's an issue there. So of course I welcome the road improvements already being scoped for the A30 corridor, but it's clear that we need to do more work on this. My hard-working residents in Hatchwarren and Beggarwood and the communities of Hatchwarren and Beggarwood want the reassurance of a clear, funded infrastructure plan to alleviate the potential aspects and potential impacts of all the new housing going in our area. And this infrastructure plan must come alongside or in advance of the delivery of all the new homes, rather than behind it, which is what we've seen in the past and has caused all the planning issues in the past. So we need to vote this plan in, because without it we are totally exposed to road developers and to continual planning. But this now is where the real work begins. Once we've got the plan through, which we must do for our residents, we must now make sure, going on for that we work hard to ensure that the plan works for all residents with the proper infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Laura James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not so long ago we attended an economic planning and housing committee meeting, and at that meeting we had a consultant come along to talk to us, a transport consultant, a specialist in transport, to talk about the A30 and the congestion on the A30 and how they were going to mitigate that congestion. And at the meeting I asked the question, I said, could you paint a picture for me? Could you give us a picture of what it's going to look like and how we're going to travel along that road when this development takes place? Because tonight, if we vote for this plan, we're talking about Hounsome Fields as an additional development on the site, on this road. I also, at the same time, talked about the possibility of the cemetery along the A30 and also the hospital. And the consultant then said to us, he said, we're going to have a cycle track. We're going to also have more buses. We need more buses to be able to get people along, to get them out of the cars. He also then said we're going to extend the lanes on the roundabouts. And I said, anything else? And I said, historically at this meeting we've talked about, or what we've been told by consultants, we're going to have number plates, and certain numbers on the number plate will then mean you won't be able to travel on the road. And he said, yes. And I said, could you give an example? And he said, for example, if there was an R on a number plate on that day or at this time, a certain time, you wouldn't then be allowed to travel on the A30. And this is, and if you want to look at the webcast, I'm very happy to provide you with the webcast of the time of that meeting so you can see what was said by the consultant. And I put it on my Facebook so everybody can see it. And everyone was in despair. In fact, it became quite a joke, but I don't find it very funny. In fact, I find it quite worrying. We have a £190 million deficit in infrastructure relating to this local plan. There is no idea, there's no funding in relation to Kempshott Roundabout, what we're going to do about Kempshott Roundabout. And we talked tonight about planning by appeal. We've had most of the major developments come forward already, and so there's very few major developments to come forward in this local plan. We've already had them. So when we're talking about the local plan, they've already got planning permission. But the other thing they haven't got is they're not going to be providing any SIL funding for our infrastructure. So that gap that we have no idea through this plan how we're going to meet it. But the other thing we're also told is to vote this through because then you won't get development by appeal. And I think it's quite dishonest to be saying that to residents because the reality under the MPPF, we have a presumption in favour of development. So development will come forward regardless of whether it's in the local plan. And we have examples already, and I'm happy to supply people with those examples of where development is coming forward that is not in the local plan. And we're calling it a windfall. And there's significant sites that are coming forward that are windfall. So I think that we need to be honest with the residents of this borough. If we're saying, if we have a local plan, you're all going to be safe, don't worry, we won't have a problem, we can stop development, we'll only have good development. Now that's not going to happen under this planning system. And you know, as was said, we do have Kennel Farm where we have children going to a school in South Ham, which is farcical. And we said that at the DC meeting, that they're going to have to travel a great distance, and it's going to have to be by car to get to school, and it's totally unacceptable. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the schools to meet the needs. And the other thing that I want to raise with you is the number, in relation to the plan before you tonight, is of sites, what it says, sorry, about employment. Historically, we challenged because the last plan said 400 or 450, and that gave you your 750 number. Now, this plan now is talking about 750 in relation to employment, which, when you look back at the documents that we were given, that would give us a much higher number. And I am concerned that we're leaving ourselves vulnerable, and the inspector is going to say that this number doesn't stack up. I think that this is a poor plan. There's lots of reasons why we think it's a poor plan, and in relation to policy, and we have consistently said that, but in relation to viability, and we have said this before, viability gives developers a get out of jail in relation to delivering affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, first, I'd like to thank Councillor Raphael for the work he's done on the local plan. I think had he been put in this position some years before, we might be in a better position ourselves now. I mean, he's sort of tried to work with everybody and bring this plan together. The trouble is, unfortunately, he boarded the Titanic just as it was about to hit the rocks. You know, we're in this mess because of the previous problems with Manydown. It's been delayed mainly by the Conservatives. They're running around trying to get us all to vote for the plan now, but they're the ones that messed this up big time. I mean, I didn't support the 748 last time, and I warned you then that it would be thrown out by the planning inspector, because you can't say you're going to be able to create thousands of jobs in Basingview, expand the infrastructure, the jobs, and create loads of jobs, and then say you're only going to build 748 houses. So the numbers you're putting forward don't even make any sense, and I think that's probably still the case with 850. We've already had in Overton the 120, I mean half the sites have already been allocated through planning appeals, including 120 in Overton, which probably would have been coming forward about now anyway. But the upshot of that is we're saying, oh, well, you know, we've got to get the infrastructure. This site got planning permission, but one of the big points about it is the school in Overton is full up. It's 2-form entry, 60. It's 60 entry, as is Whitchurch. But Hampshire, in their wisdom, have decided that they're not going to expand Overton and Whitchurch, they're just going to expand Whitchurch. So it no means the children from this, well, as a result of this development, children in Overton will be sent to Whitchurch School, the excess on there, and that's the 120. We're going to get another 150, possibly through neighbourhood planning, so that's just going to make the situation even worse. And the way, because of the rather lopsided way the Overton School is on one side of the village, obviously they do it on the basis of how close you live to the school. And the most people who will benefit from that will be the people on the newer estates. The old estates, like the council estate I was brought up on the far side of the village, they will be the first people to be excluded in Overton. Well, not quite the first people, because the other thing is, because Overton's a C of E controlled school, it'll be the people who don't go to church will be excluded first, which will be interesting. Oh, well, say Church of England ones, people like myself who went to a Methodist one, we wouldn't get a look in either, and as all the other religions, well, obviously no hope for them either, is there? So you'll have to send your 4- or 5-year-old children on a bus to Whitchurch. I mean, that's how poor the infrastructure for this sort of development is, and that's where we are now. And we're not going to be able to do anything about that because Hampshire won't change their mind. Unless, of course, we accept even more massive levels of development when they might consider expanding Overton. So that's, you know, that's where we are with this. This plan is a mess. Half the sites have already got planning permission. We don't have a 5-year land supply. And if you look at the numbers, I don't see we're going to get one without all the neighbourhood planning sites coming forward. And they'll have to come forward in the next year or so. And the problem is, if this plan was going to be passed next week, I might consider voting for it just to get a plan in place. But we were sort of told with the planning inspector, I was actually at the meeting there, that it was suggested that we were going to be able to get a plan in place by this autumn, but that's no slip to next spring. It's a year away. Well, you can actually get planning permission for a lot of houses in this country in a year, and I suspect most of them the developers will start putting the planning permission in for all the outstanding sites that are available and any other ones they can find. And there's not much we're going to be able to do with it, even if we vote for this plan, because it isn't going to be in place for another year. And of course, who's actually making this decision? Because we asked people in the borough, you know, how many houses they wanted. You know, we did a big consultation. They said a much lower number. We've agreed that. We agreed to 748 because we thought that's what appropriate. But one man from Bristol comes down here and says, no, you can't do that. You've got to build 850 because I've decided. And to a certain extent, largely based on the evidence we provided, which doesn't, so we haven't actually helped ourselves there, have we? By, on the one hand, driving for growth all the time and then saying we don't want to build houses. And I was reading a bit in the paper earlier today, and there's the famous Tony Benn quotations, you know, questions for the powerful, you know, what power do you have, where did you get it, in whose interest do you exercise it, to whom are you accountable, and how can we get rid of you? Well, the reality is it's not the poor old, it's not Mr Fox, he's not the problem, is he? He just works for Mr Pickles, and who does Mr Pickles work for? This government. Because who got us into the problem, and particularly in Overton, under the old South East plan, we were actually, in the rest of Hampshire, a low-growth area, we weren't going to get a lot of houses. I remember Councillor Mitchell saying, if any idiot decides to build hundreds of houses in Overton, I'll come along and march with you. Well, unfortunately, Horace is no longer with us, well, not in this chamber, so he won't be coming along to march with us anytime soon, but that's the reality. Thanks to his government, well, sorry, and the Liberal Democrats, that's why we're in the mess in Overton. We're in a particularly worse mess down there, but the rest of the country's in a mess anyway, so... You know, the question is, how can we get rid of you? Well, hopefully we've got a general election coming up quite soon, so we can get rid of the lot of them. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm distraught to discover that I might have upset somebody in what I said in the previous meeting. So I want to say now, I really do want the Labour members on this council to support a plan which includes the 40% they advocate so much, which looks after the interests of the citizens they're elected to represent. And I'm sorry if I upset them. I'll probably do it again, but not immediately. Because one bit of growing up is that you stop blaming everything on things that have happened before. And we in our own hands now is what happens next. And I knew that the numbers that were being talked about several years ago were wrong. But now we have got a plan that has quite a lot of support. We have the people, the neighbourhood plan people doing the work to find sites. Incidentally, the appeal decision this week rejected the case from Whitchurch and this council that granting permission was premature because we were in the middle of doing a neighbourhood plan. So there's another interesting area there that could be a threat across the whole of the borough. But we need a plan. We've spent an awful long time on it. All of us could find something else that somebody has done that's wrong, but let's get it in there and then let's work with it. Now, particularly the point that was mentioned to me is this question of viability. Well, Councillor Tilbury and I spent some time with some officers and a few day trippers from the other parties looking at the issue of viability. And we have an arrangement when it comes to development control that any member of the council can get access to the full viability assessments. At the higher plan level, we've got to be more sophisticated, we've got to be hard with these people. And we have got a lot of developers who have agreed to the 40%. But again, at the present time, Taylor Wimpey are challenging the proportion of affordable housing on a fairly large development immediately west of our borough boundary in the parish of Smennel. And that's going to go on whatever we do. We've got to be equipped to do it, and openness between ourselves, officers and members, is the way we'll tackle that. Now, I want to mention something that is new, which is the target for jobs. And I'm very glad it's a target for jobs, not a target of square feet or anything like that. On policy EP1, within the period 2011 to 2029, the local plan will aim to support the creation of between 450 and 700 jobs per annum. At the last minute in the previous review of the plan, I proposed, and it was accepted, an amendment saying neighbourhood plans could allocate employment sites. I have to say that that's really put the fox among the chickens in Whitchurch. We're not doing terribly well, but I find that the neighbourhood plan people, when talking to the borough council, are told it's not a strategic requirement. When the people of Whitchurch returned their survey forms, there was a strong support for growth in existing employment. And now I see, in fact I believe it was already there, but I hadn't noticed it before, that employment uses which are appropriate to the site's location. This is mixed use with housing. Now those aren't the sort of employment that's currently there and needs growth. Yes, thanks. It's perhaps a nice idea that we can just have offices and R&D labs and not have any working on shop floors. But this borough is very much founded on people who work on shop floors, and Whitchurch is no different from that. So I do hope that we're going to do a little bit of serious study of what that target means in here, now that it's been accepted, or once it's been accepted at the inspector's suggestion.
Thank you. Councillor Leake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you're aware, I voted against the approval of the local plan last July. I did so largely because of my concerns about the lack of infrastructure which is likely to be provided, and in particular, the failure to commit to a western bypass. I've already reiterated my concerns on this subject earlier this evening and will not repeat myself. But I found it interesting that Councillor Laura James highlighted the funding shortfall that she saw for infrastructure spending, although I noted that she failed to mention that in the earlier debate on Manydown. I've also expressed my concerns about the ability of one man to overrule the careful considerations of this council by demanding that the number of dwellings to be built be increased from 748 to 850? Why did we spend so much time identifying sites and agreeing a number? What happened to local decision-making? My ward contains both the Manydown site and Marnell Park. The old golf course and Merton Rise were once part of my ward. These sites will provide a very large part of the housing requirement over the next 14 years. Is it surprising my residents say, why us? Why doesn't Basingstoke expand south of the motorway or to the east of Old Basing? They ask. I guess better lobbying would have been the answer, and perhaps we should have consulted Councillor Mrs. Cubitt. The draft local plan does contain some policies which I proposed and which I hope the inspector will not reject. The strategic gap between Sherborne St John and the town of Basingstoke is particularly important in the light of the sites proposed for development. I'm also particularly pleased that the industrialisation of redundant farm buildings will hopefully not occur where the access roads are inappropriate. Far from allowing further diversification, the government should require these buildings to be removed, in my opinion. The draft local plan we are being asked to approve has many deficiencies, as many have said this evening, not least the wholly inadequate provision for infrastructure. Unfortunately, it is the only plan we have, and we cannot debate it forever. I'm also conscious, as others have said, that without a plan, we remain open to further developer-led applications. It is with a heavy heart, therefore, that I have decided to vote in favour. And whilst I am very unlikely to see the outcome in 2029, I hope those that do will not regret the decision we make tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Golding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of EPH and people who watch webcasts and things will appreciate that the portfolio holder managed to insult me in rather more measured terms tonight than he did on that evening, so I'm grateful for that. I assume he's expecting I will vote with the other people insulted tonight, and we shall see when we get to the vote how that works out. I fully support the need for a local plan. I have not previously voted against it. We do need one, but it has to be a plan that complies with the NPPF. It has to be a plan that is based on evidence, a plan that is going to be found sound, a plan that is the most suitable strategy available, and in short, a plan that makes sense. And whilst the previous version had its failings, it did just about scrape through, this one fails. The planning inspector at his meeting in December was concerned about the imbalance between the east and the west of the town. A lot of roads being built on the east, a lot of houses going on the west, a lot of employment on the east, no much employment on the west, and that is not addressed here. In fact, this proposed change makes it worse by putting another 750 houses even further west in Handsome Fields. The planning inspector suggested a few other things we could do to make up the numbers. We could allocate some development to middle-sized villages. That hasn't happened. I'll leave you to speculate why. We could put some more houses on the east. That isn't in here. So, in short, I should be voting against. Thank you.
And it's about time we heard from Councillor Bierman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Don't know that I quite like saying I told you so, but I did on Manydown, and like many others, on the question, when I say many others, no, I'll draw that back. Like my independent colleagues and the Liberal Democrats, we said these housing numbers will never be accepted and they'll be pushed up, and I too don't think we're necessarily at the maximum that will be required of us. And again, I don't like the fact that it's one bloke doing it, albeit under pressure from a certain Mr. Pickles. What I do have difficulty with accepting in being asked to support this plan is that In one breath we're saying keep the housing numbers down, and in the next breath our council leader is going around promoting the economic growth. Now he does this very well, no question about it. In fact, a friend of mine attended a seminar he was presenting at and said how inspiring he was. The trouble is, if he keeps inspiring people to think that this is a good place for economic growth, we have to accept the houses that go with that. That's the issue, and we can't have one without the other, and it seems to be a blind spot. The portfolio holder mentioned about possibly protecting Chinham. I'm glad it's mentioned in dispatches. Chinham, Popley, generally the North East has been hammered over recent years, and all the Chinham councillors and at least one of the Bramley and Sherfield councillors have been leaping up and down in unison, irrespective of political flavour, about the lack of the infrastructure and no sight of it coming. That's the problem. Although somebody will now leap up and say, the LEP's going to sort it all out. But, you know, the LEP seems to be something that's quite independent from us and that we have next to no influence over. And that's the thing that worries me. Because when we've been discussing this plan in the earlier stages, we were reminded by our Tory colleagues that, don't worry, localism will sort all that out. You will be able to decide what happens and how it's all controlled. I don't hear localism mentioned at all these days. I don't know what's happened to it, but perhaps somebody's realised it wasn't for real. I have to say, I have, till now, always voted against this plan. If you like being a bit parochial, I think the damage is done around Chinham and that part of the world. So I have a little difficulty in saying let's carry on voting against it, because I can also accept what has been said by the Liberal Democrats, particularly tonight, about this question of having other stuff dumped on us. And it's beginning to cost a lot of money, and it's beginning to just be pointless, because each time you start trying to resist, you're kicked in the teeth, aren't you? You know that it's going to fail. And it is the biggest betrayal from this government of the residents of the nation that we would have more influence on what is happening, because we don't have the influence in what is, after all, the most important thing, i.e. where and how we live. And once the damage is done, it can't be undone. And I think I'm drifting towards actually sitting on my hands. I couldn't bring myself to vote for this plan because the damage is too great. But again, we know why the damage is as bad as it was, and Councillor Tilby is quite right to say that Councillor Raphael has tried quite manfully to unscramble some of that damage, but it was too late. I will commend Councillor Paula Baker and others who, in the last local plan, had a sensible system where there was proper consultation in the different local areas and exhibitions, and people felt they were involved. That was the previous joint administration. And for some reason, on this time round, we've just gone in saying, we know it all because this expert or the other has looked at this or that or the other, and we know which direction we're going. So I think it's too late to change much. Good luck, but for heaven's sake, I hope those that have put us in this position will fight us strongly to try and get the infrastructure in the right place to undo the damage that's already been done around the North East and is only going to get worse with what is being forced upon us. And just quickly, an anecdote about the school. The school was being mentioned about the silly schools. We've got a situation now where a school where a new development is going to be built, Razor's Farm, and the kids are going to be bussed past one school to go to another school 2 miles away. Is that potty or what?
Thank you. Councillor Paul Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think most of what has needed to be said has been said. I'll just go back to the previous speaker. I'll just add something to the anecdote about the schools. The other problem is it's busing or car, but it's got to cross the A33. Now, the A33 is going to increase immeasurably when these various planned developments occur. And to us, locally, within the area, both in Bramley and in Chinham, we just don't understand the thought processes that go on at the LEA. Fortunately, we're both governors of local schools, and I certainly will be representing my case to the LEA of
trying to find out how their brains work down there. Before us this evening is the update to the local plan. It's a strategy. I heard it from one of the speakers. Consider this to be a strategy. Now, I've worked in international strategy of one form or another. Doesn't matter where it was, but it was pretty important. And a strategy is a vision. When you work down from the strategy to the detail, that's when you have to get into the detail of how you're going to fund it, get agreements, and everything else. And that's the same with this infrastructure. I've had as many concerns, as Councillor Bierman said, as other councillors, about infrastructure. Without infrastructure, we don't have communities. We certainly don't have sustainable communities as defined in the MPPF. So the two go together without any question. The funding of that, I unfortunately couldn't attend the last EPH, but I heard a figure, and it doesn't matter what it is, it's measured in hundreds of millions of pounds, and I have no idea where we're going to get that kind of money. Whatever government we have after May the 7th is going to have to make provision for it. The important thing at the moment is that, warts and all, this local plan must go to the inspector this time in the form that we've got. It is, in the expression of my previous life, it's good enough. It's not perfect. I quite agree with that. But I do recall talking to the current interim chief executive when we were going through a thing called the SHLA. That'll bring nightmares back to several members, that every 5 years it gets reviewed. A plan has to be reviewed because this plan won't be set in stone for all the years that it exists. Natural forces will cause us to go back to re-examine things that aren't able to be provided within this plan, and they're going to have to be changed. So we're all going to have to apply our thought processes, experts if we need them, to actually amend the plan as we go on to make it the best plan for Basingstoke. It's not perfect now. However, it's the final version that will go out for final consultation, I believe, portfolio holder, and then will be submitted for examination later this year. We've reached this stage after extensive internal and external scrutiny within Basingstoke and Deane, external I mean to the general public, and have reached the stage for this good enough for examination. I just wish the party opposite, the Labour group, had contributed a little bit more to it than, I'm afraid, sitting on their hands during some of the committee discussions that we had, and certainly with the voting. If this paper is not accepted by this council tonight, there are no more debates or committee papers or reports. We have to restart the whole plan, and thank you for correcting the length of time, portfolio holder, from the beginning. In that event, we will be subject to planning by application, and we will not have any planning policies. You can kiss goodbye to your 40%. Anyone voting against this paper, anyone voting against this paper is voting for just that, an uncontrolled development for the next 2 years at least. I support the plan.
Councillor Diane Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As one of the Oakley councillors who Councillor Raphael has announced will be laughed at for some reason, I'm going to briefly state my position. When the plan was first voted on in this chamber, I voted against it because I was appalled at the vast development proposed at Manydown, following assurances in literature put out on my behalf as an election candidate that these beautiful and necessary fields would be saved from development. The massive development proposed did not and does not sit well with my sense of integrity. We now have not only more houses proposed on those fields, but a development area which all but joins Manydown to the north of the village of Oakley at Newfound, and in addition the inclusion of Hounsome Fields to accommodate an extra 750 houses. Whilst I do genuinely commend the portfolio holder on his dedication and skill in getting the local plan to this stage, I feel that the plan shows no overall vision for our town, and virtually dumps houses to the west, and on Manydown in particular, as and when extra homes are called for, even if that call comes from one solitary inspector. Having said that, I'm reluctant to take any action which would risk delaying any further the adoption of our borough's neighbourhood plans. Any further delay will hand more power to developers whose only constraint is money. Good people in Basingstoke's surrounding villages have worked hard to produce their neighbourhood plans and to bring about development in their villages which they believe is best for the local population. I'll therefore not be voting against at this stage, although I can't bring myself, like Councillor Bierman, to actually vote for it, so I'll probably abstain, but will save my fight for the public examination plan of the plan due later this year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And the last speaker that I have is Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief. I won't rehearse the arguments in favour of accepting this plan that's been put forward by my colleagues, but I would draw attention to the last EPH meeting, particularly when we talked about transport, and it's clear that infrastructure and transport is a major issue that concerns everybody within this room and everybody in the borough. The point I'd like to make is that the expert who attended and presented a strategic report for the next 15 years on evidence to say this is what it might look like, it might be in the future. He did not in any way sit there and say this is what's going to happen. He was looking at traffic flows in the next 15 years and actually was very reluctant to go beyond saying this is the mathematical interpretation of this. So it would be wrong to make an interpretation and say that this is what's going to happen. It clearly isn't, but a lot of work will need to be done to develop an infrastructure and transport plan that goes alongside what I regard as a strong plan of 850 houses. Thank you.
Councillor Raphael, could you sum up?
Well, Mr. Mayor, can I thank all speakers in this debate, and can I begin by thanking Councillor Tilbury for his kind words. Can I thank Councillor Mrs Baker for her wise words, and I think she's absolutely right. This may not be everyone's complete cup of tea, but it might be Earl Grey compared to builder's tea for some. Can I thank Councillor Leek for his measured words, and Councillor Mrs Taylor as well. I would perhaps ask that Councillor Golding just listen to the words of Councillor Bierman, because they were absolutely right. When he, Councillor Golding, Mr Mayor, thinks that the problems of housing can be solved by dumping more houses in Chinham and to the east, he's completely and utterly wrong. And I'm glad that the majority of councillors disagree with him. Can I thank Councillor Keith Watts for his measured words and wise support throughout the whole of this process. And then finally, can I come to Councillor Miss James? Can I thank her for what she has said tonight? Much of what he said resonates with most of us, and she's been articulated many of the issues that we have debated at committee stage. My one sadness has been throughout the whole of this process, and I join with Councillor Keith Watts in saying this, is just that the Labour group's policy up until this very moment has been it's been quite prepared to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's just ridiculous in my view. It's ridiculous in the Liberal Democrats' view. We have a plan where the Labour councillors have shaped it at committee stage. They know that. They've shaped the policies and they have contributed. And at every stage when we come to this stage, they say, well, we'll back off and vote against it. And it is bonkers. And with the last EPH committee, when teasing the Labour councillors as to why they've never come up with a housing number, Councillor Gary Watts had a moment of free speech, it must be, because he said, oh, I'm quite happy with this number that you're putting forward of 850. And then there was a sort of cold frizzle came across the committee as though he had broken the wall of silence and he wasn't meant to say that. Well, great for Councillor Gary Watts. Why isn't he here tonight? Because he's probably been excluded from the studio. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, I'm sorry about that. Obviously, your front row didn't know that either. But, well, why are you saying we asked then? But, Mr Mayor, it's sadness that he's not here tonight, because he's obviously one of those who doesn't join the student union, but a tendency of let's just play politics for the sake of it and down with the Tories. And perhaps he would have joined the coalition of the grown-ups tonight, along with the Liberal Democrats. I hope Labour won't vote against this. It may be that it's not your type of plan, written as a result of legislation from not your type of government. But please sit on your hands if that's all you can do. But don't vote against it, please, because it carries much more weight for the borough, and who knows who will be in charge of this borough in years to come. and you will have a play in that plan as it's enforced. So I urge you to not vote against it, and I urge all other members to support it. And thank you for all your contributions and for all your hard work in getting us to this stage.
We will now move to the vote. The vote is open. Still got one person to vote. The vote is closed. And the motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do wish that the members of this council, excuse me, I do wish that the members of this council do not go away with any view other than Councillor Watts would behave if he could, and he has a seriously ill wife and she's been ill for years. Thank you.
I'm sure the Labour Council aren't suggesting that I was saying anything other than that. I had no idea, and of course I didn't think they did, by the way they were saying we wish he was here too, so I thought he was lost somewhere, but I didn't realise that it was more serious than that, and clearly I wouldn't have perhaps said it in quite the way.
Councillor Keating, perhaps you could pass on to Councillor Watts the feelings of this council and the sympathy that we have for his situation. Right. Reports by council officers. If we turn to paper C, Community Governance Review of Sherfield-on-Loddon. As this is a report from the council officers, I shall be presenting it myself. Hush, please. And the recommendation is on page 40 of 79. I'm sorry, the recommendation is on... It's gone quiet now. Right, so recommendation is on page 40 of 79. Are we agreed? I can see a few hands coming up. Right, before we proceed, can somebody second that motion? Thank you. Tomlin. Councillor Bierman, would you like to start the debate?
Sure I do, but really, here I am. Right, before I go any further, 3 times I'm going to say, just in case somebody wishes to misinterpret anything that I might say now, I support the creation of a new parish council for whatever it's called. I support a new parish council for whatever it's called. I support a new parish council for whatever it's called. Right. Now, well, that's never been in doubt, that. It's just that some have chosen to interpret what I have said in the past in a different way. And the different way was how we have got to the particular position we're in, and I'm not at all content that we're in the right position, but mainly that is not a question of the will of the residents, it's a question of the process and how the case was put. In other words, basically the arguments about the name, which is what this is all about, and what the representatives from Sherfield Parish Council were putting forward, is the issue. Now, names tend to be quite emotional matters. You only need to look at some of the things, names of countries, names of political parties, names of all sorts of things, even children's names I hear. And they raise perhaps a higher proportion of emotion than the topic deserves. However, I do agree with the representations made by the Sherfield on Loddon Parish Council. That said, I can't ignore the fact that I represent the area concerned, and however one looks at the statistics, the people who took part in the vote, not enough, but will probably say our wish in terms of the majority preference for the name is what we want to be fulfilled. Now, I think it will lead to problems, and I think in a few years' time we might well come to regret it. But if that's the way that the residents have chosen to go, I don't feel I'm able to resist it, even though I don't agree with it. I have tried to listen to the people who I represent, and I shall try and do that tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, again, I also support the principle of a separate parish council being created, but I do support Sherford and Loddon Parish Council. It is the name, that is the issue. There'll be confusion with the existing parish council. Will it be Sherfield PC on Loddon or the park? It's going to be confusing. The site is officially Taylor's Farm. It's on maps, it's on road signs. Geographical link is Taylor's Farm. The name Sherfield Park is purely a developer's name. I believe we should not be dictated to by a developer's preferred marketing wish. This has been poorly adhered to over the years by this council. Do we wish developers not only to be able to develop where they like, but then call the locations by their preferred names? I think not. And the other point is the public choice. Yes, of course the local wishes should be heard. However, the number of responses, as you heard from the parish council, is low compared to the total population of Taylor's Farm. And even at DC yesterday, we had a petition of 200 signatures in opposition to an application. And there were sound reasons, however, though, to allow that application. But it was against the public opinion. So there are times when we have to make a judgment which may be contrary to the public wish. I think this is what we need to do in this case. So I would ask that the report be withdrawn and then redrawn with the name Loddon Valley PC as the working party choice, the geographical link with the Loddon Valley, that's there in place, and it's what the existing parish council want to avoid confusion. Thank you.
Councillor Still.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, the first part of the parishioner's question relates to the working party and their role in the process. On this, I would make reference to the fact that the working party had a very specific role, which was agreed to by officers of the borough and Sherford on Loddon Parish Council. The working party was not asked to give a recommendation on a name, merely to provide a list of possible names that could be used or not by the borough in the second consultation. The working party was not there to dictate terms, but to be a conduit for democracy to be allowed to happen. And certainly the parish council involved was not asked to or would be allowed to make constraints to the officers in their reports. There is no confusion over the name, and the days of a delivery driver needing to ask a passer-by where a Pacific road might be disappeared years ago. Sat-navs has all but eliminated the rolling down of a window to ask directions of a friendly pedestrian. Sherfield Park is known throughout the borough and further afield, not only by tens of thousands of motorists who drive past the 10-foot high sign on the A33 each day, but by the destinations on the front of the buses, the Basingstoke Gazette articles, Hampshire Constabulary, who use it in their beat reports. Sentinel Housing gives directions to it. Four Lane School refers to it in their catchment notes. The borough uses it, not least in their recent generous donation of £120,000 to the Sherfield Park Community Centre, home of the Sherfield Park Community Association. And it is even used by the Sherford on Loddon Parish Council in their Sherford on Loddon Walk on the Hampshire County website, quote, "Start at the entrance to Sherfield Park," unquote. Jump in a cab at the station, order a pizza, hop on a bus and ask for Sherfield Park. They will all know where to go. They have done for over 10 years. Mr Mayor, as for the historical significance, a glance at the Ordnance Survey map of 1817 or even as recent as 1958, you will see no mention of Taylor's Farm, but the name of Sherfield sits directly on top of Sherfield Park, which incidentally is there too. The name of Sherfield should not be a jealously guarded piece of silver, a geographical trademark. It is part of our heritage and history. The land beneath the trainers of the Sherfield Park Running Club or the plump little knees of the Sherfield Park Toddler Group has been Sherfield for centuries. Parishes sit quite amicably together, sharing similar names all over the country, without dramas of posts going astray or befuddled parishioners and fraught parish clerks. Even looking closer to home in Hampshire, we have Strathfield Say and Strathfield Turgis as neighbouring parishes. Perhaps in due course they could tell us how they avoid this quagmire of confusion. The question makes reference to a certain percentage of votes cast versus the total electorate. I am sure that everyone in this chamber will be delighted that the electoral system in the UK is not based upon how many people didn't vote for us, rather than those that did. However, Mr Mayor, this process has been a straightforward model of democracy in action. Residents in Sherford-on-Loddon and Chinham democratically and overwhelmingly agreed for a governance review and a separate parish. Residents democratically and overwhelmingly voiced their support for Sherfield Park. I would urge this council to follow their lead and to vote to accept the officer's recommendations in its entirety. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have any more speakers? I'm afraid not. Sorry. Right. Before we move to a vote, and I know that Elaine has asked for it to be recorded. I'd just like Lisa Kirkman to explain the implications of voting it down as it stands at the moment.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, there is a deadline in which the governance review needs to be concluded, and that is the 1st of June of this year. It is the full council's duty to confirm a name for the parish council, whatever that will be. So a decision will need to be made before the 1st of June, and hopefully, councillors, that will be this evening. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor James.
Mr Mayor, if we were to agree to the Sherfield Park name tonight, does that prevent in any way a future parish council decision to review the name?
Not at all. In fact, that would be an excellent way forward to leave it to the parish council to determine what name they wanted in due course. They would have to apply through the council, but it certainly would not be turned down if they came up with something suitable. Move to the votes. Vote is open. Has everybody voted who wants to vote? The vote is closed. Carried. B2, Members' Allowance Scheme 2015-16, report of the Interim Chief Executive Laura Taylor, paper D. Is the motion seconded?
Needs to be seconded for us to get the amendment.
If it's not seconded, then it will fall and there will be no amendment. Gavin, you're more than welcome. Right. Who would like to speak? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm submitting an amendment to the recommendation as per the order paper, and I'd just like to read it out to simplify some of the words I submitted. I'm not changing anything, I'm omitting words just to make it crystal clear. The principal motion before you this evening is over-complex, will lead to even more complicated reviews in the future, and is in itself not easy to understand, and I did canvass a few other councillors on that point. As a simple alternative, an amendment to the motion that is, I gather, supported by other councillors, that members' allowances should be increased by 1%. This small uplift demonstrates that we do not seek excessive increases to our allowances and reflects our collective fiscal responsibility when it comes to our own remuneration. I would also like to add and thank the independent remuneration panel for the work that they've done and submitted in their report.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Gavin James.
I've been very helpful this evening, Mr. Mayor. Whenever there's a review, and I take the principle that I've used in the commissioning outcome group reviews, when you review anything, the benchmark you measure it against is what is as is. This review, I don't believe, improves upon where we are as is, and therefore the existing policy of increasing our allowances in line with staff increments and based on existing allowances, I think is the right way forward, because I don't think we can improve upon it at this time. Thank you.
Do I have any more speakers? So, with Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to... I should go and sit over there if you do. Thank you. I have 100% affordable housing developments in my St Mary Bourne. But anyway, I'd just like to point out on page 66 of 79, there is in fact an error, number 7, about pensions for councillors. Those of us who were elected last May were denied access to the pension fund, so we are somewhat severely disadvantaged. And I did want also to point out, I did submit something to the remuneration panel which seems to have been completely dismissed, which is that those of us in the rural areas, my patch is 12 miles by 5 miles. I do about 1,000 to 1,500 miles a year, which comes out of my allowance because it's not claimable. And sadly, although I'd like to use a bike, it's quite impractical, as I would not be here tonight if I did. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think you'll find, Councillor Faulkner, that your unclaimed mileage, the unallowable mileage which you incur as a councillor, is allowed by the Inland Revenue as an allowable expense. If you'd like to talk to me afterwards, I will help you with that. Now, before we move to the amendment, I will say with some regret that the increase in the mayoral allowance has not been passed into the amendment, so that will fall. Although that has no benefits to me, I must admit I was hoping that future mayors would be adequately recompensed, but not to be, so we will move to the vote. Vote on the amendment. Two to vote. Close the vote. The amendment is carried. It now becomes a substantive motion, and we vote on the substantive motion. Now voting on the substantive motion.
You need to explain that the amendment has been carried. So, Councillor James, they're confused over there.
The amendment was carried. It now becomes a substantive motion. We're now voting on the substantive.
Which is the amendment.
As amended, yep.
Do you want me to? Do you want me to?
No, I think that's quite capable of. There's only 8 of them haven't voted. It's coming down. Peer pressure. 4 to vote. Well, 3. Right, I'm closing the vote. Carried. Making good time. Item 9, notice of motion, Mind Mental Health Care Crisis Concordat. Mover, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In moving this motion, I want to start by saying that 1 in 4 of us in our life will face a mental health illness, and where we turn to for support and how we're supported is absolutely critical. Nobody should have to face a mental health problem alone. Over 40% of people at the moment have to wait over 3 months just for an assessment to find out where they can get treatment. Shockingly, 1 in 10 people have to wait more than a year. Once assessed, most people start therapy within 3 months, but a third have to wait longer. And waiting so long for treatment can damage relationships, it can stop people working, it can have long-lasting effects on their mental health. And Mind have found that while waiting for treatment, 67% of people become more unwell. 67% had suicidal thoughts. 40% harmed themselves. 37% went into crisis. 16% of people attempted to take their own lives. And 3% were sectioned. We have excellent mental health care services locally in Basingstoke who are struggling with very challenging circumstances. And speaking to them, they've told me about the work they do and what a difference we could make as a borough council by signing up to the Concordat. That's because joined-up working is the single most important way that agencies and services can support and make a difference to people suffering from mental health illness. And I'm pleased to say that as a result of this motion being on our agenda, the Hampshire Fire Service are now going to examine and sign up to the Concordat as well, which is great news. Local services are facing huge challenges, not least the impact of supporting people cuts to the emergency department at the hospital. Now that the extra winter monies for the NHS are ending, there is a real issue with assessment out of hours. Amongst other issues that are directly relevant are the loss of the supported housing panels, the loss of mental health points as part of the new housing points system, and that is actually having an impact on people. When we talk about delayed discharge and coming back into the community, 75% of the delays relate to housing issues, securing funding for care packages or safeguarding issues. People are struggling to hold down their tenancies because they aren't necessarily getting the support they need, and people for who, for whatever reason, have no fixed abode, are struggling to access the system in terms of housing. Now, talking about these issues with practitioners has opened my eyes to the level of coordination that's needed and where we can play a really important role, not just with the services that we provide ourselves, but the services we provide working with our partners. And this is about partnership working with other agencies. And they would welcome us signing up. And I hope this evening that we can come together cross-party. So, Mr. Mayor, by signing up to this Concordat, we will send a clear message of how seriously we take all of these issues and how we believe we can make a difference. And I do genuinely hope it garners support from across the chamber, from all parties, because I'm sure we all support Mind, the charity, their work, our local agencies and local organisations, but also the Concordat and its aims and aspirations. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Cousins, do you wish to second it and speak now?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to second this motion, and I do so simply on the basis that mental health and well-being needs to be brought into mainstream conversation, as cancer now has. Since April 2014, I started a campaign called End the Stigma, and it was to encourage people to talk about mental health. 1 year in, I'm pleased to say that it's working well. People are talking about mental health in our borough, and I'm looking to broaden its horizon soon. Since I launched it, I've spoken to over 75 people, wide-ranging from public sector therapists, doctors, charities and residents, to hear their experiences. And I've spoken to residents from pretty much every ward. I've spoken to residents from my ward in Brookvale and Kings Furlong, Chinham, Sherburn St John, Preston Candover, Grove, Norden and Eastrop, just to name a few. And the people I've also spoken to have varied. The youngest sufferer who I met was 8 years old, and the oldest was 83. And they have a wide range in backgrounds too. Self-confessed well-off families, working parents and people on benefits. The harsh reality is, Mr Mayor, that mental health is simply an illness that can affect anybody. And it has more in common than people realise. Over the course of a year, 25% of the population will experience some form of mental health problem. 1 in 5 older people suffer from depression, increasing to 2 in 5 when they live in a care home. Women are more likely to suffer from a mental health illness than men, and suicide rates show that men are more likely to die by suicide than women, and indeed men aged under 35 are the most at risk in this category. Self-harm statistics in the UK show that 400 per 100,000 people will self-harm. That is one of the highest in Europe. There are also many forms of mental health illnesses such as anxiety, depression, multiple personality disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia and dementia. Signing up to the Concordat will be our first step in the path to the right direction. And it's important that we sign up to this because we join with bodies such as the Hampshire Constabulary and the Police and Crimes Commissioner, because mental health sufferers are more likely to be victims of crime than to carry them out. It's also important as this can lead to proper safeguarding for our residents. I would like all councillors to undertake dementia-friendly training. I'd also like for our council to look at the Safe Places Support Scheme, which is currently undergoing and winning awards in Bournemouth and Poole. Mr Mayor, people I have spoken to also talk about the stigma, the victimisation and the bullying that they see, hear and receive in person and on social media. And it gives me no pleasure in saying this, Mr Mayor, but terms like mong and retard are all too easily said, and they're all derogatory and they're all abusively thrown at sufferers of mental health. Signing the Concordat will confirm that we want to stamp out this behaviour in our communities, but it will also put our own house in order. Mr Mayor, it also fills me with great dismay to inform the Chamber that one member believes it is okay to use the word retard on social media. To compound this matter, this member was until very recently a group leader. I hope tonight he apologises for retweeting that tweet that used that derogatory term. Mr Mayor, signing up to the Concordat should be part of our intentions as the borough. We all agree that we want to help every single member of the public and make their lives better. Tonight we can show collective responsibility by agreeing to sign the Concordat. We can show that we want to make it easier in accessing mental health services. We can show that we want to create schemes that support people within our communities and help them flourish. And tonight we can show that we want to help the most vulnerable people in our borough. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Cousins. One thing I can tell you is that dementia-friendly training is planned for councillors, and hopefully it will be during the Purdah period, so it will not be long coming. Gavin James is next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we all have to accept this council is not directly involved in the provision of crisis care. However, I hope the administration will accept the motion being referred to a committee so we can take a properly considered view of what the local authority can bring to the table. I think everyone will accept that Nick Clegg and Norman Lamb in particular have sought to drive the issue of mental health up the political agenda. I would like to outline just some of the steps that have been taken. The Lib Dems believe mental health should not be ignored or stigmatised. It should be taken as seriously as physical health. The Lib Dems have recently announced that the treatment for mental health conditions will be brought in line to the NHS services with the introduction of the first ever waiting time standards. For the first time from April 2015, most patients needing talking therapies for conditions like depression will be guaranteed the treatment they need in as little as 6 weeks with a maximum wait of 18 weeks. For many patients experiencing their first episode of psychosis, the NHS will start to provide treatment within 2 weeks of referral, bringing it into line with consultations for cancer. Evidence shows that treating psychosis rapidly can dramatically improve patients' chances of recovery and potentially save £44 million each year in hospital admissions. Early intervention will reduce the crisis. I know from a personal point of view, working in the court, I see what happens when mental health is not intervened with early. I see the crisis. It's often in the cells every morning, and that's the wrong place for mental health patients to be. The Liberal Democrat Mental Health Action Plan sets out our priorities for essential change in mental health, including choice in mental health so people can choose in the same way as they would for any other kind of health care. We've committed £25 million for a scheme that identifies health issues, offenders, when they leave the criminal justice system. The government is investing over £400 million to give thousands of people access to evidence-based psychological therapies, investing £54 million in order to improve access to mental health care for children, and also the Time to Change campaign, which challenges mental health stigma and discrimination. Less than 2 weeks ago, Nick Clegg was able to announce £1.25 billion of new funding for children's mental health services, which will help treat 110,000 more children with mental health issues and also provide rapid access treatment for pregnant women and new mothers. Mr Mayor, I do think it's very important that this borough does do what it can to see whether it can assist with the crisis situation, but also with early intervention for our grant funding schemes. I therefore support this motion and hope it ends up in a committee so we can properly explore what we can offer the Concordat. Thank you.
Councillor Rosselston.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I welcome the intent behind this motion and fully endorse a commitment by the Council to improve outcomes for people experiencing mental health crisis in the context of the services we provide. The Council does not provide an emergency response to people in mental health crisis, but officers who deal directly with vulnerable adults, such as those involved in housing benefits, community safety, safeguarding and our reception and contact centre services, may at some point encounter someone in crisis. They know that they can contact the specialists who are able to provide the appropriate emergency intervention. Therefore, I very much welcome the commitment given by the signatories in Hampshire to meet the needs of our residents in these urgent situations. I would like to stress that the Mental Health Crisis Care Concordat is for those agencies with an emergency role, and therefore this Council cannot be a signatory to that document. However, various services of the Council can play a key role in early intervention and support through recovery. In Basingstoke-Deane, we have established mental health support, such as housing benefit referrals, inclusion of a mental health nurse in the Community Safety Antisocial Behaviour Panel, emotional first aid courses, support from the community and voluntary sector grant-funded programme for counselling services for young people, support for ex-service personnel experiencing mental health issues, contributing to the Council's commitment to the Army Covenant, physical activity sessions and various initiatives to support people with dementia. Council officers also play an active role on the Basingstoke Area Strategic Partnership cross-cutting group on mental health, which brings local agencies together to improve service provision, particularly around early intervention and preventative help. An approach has therefore been made through the Chief Executive of Solent Mind to the coordinator of the crisis care organisations in Hampshire to ask whether there is a way for this Council and potentially other relevant local agencies to publicly pledge support through the services we provide. He is pleased this Council is keen to play such a role and has suggested that Hampshire Action Plan Steering Group consider the role of district and borough councils in supporting the programme of work. As portfolio holder, I commit to sign a pledge to improve outcomes for people experiencing mental health crisis in the context of the service we provide, once an appropriate way to demonstrate our support has been discussed, consulted upon and agreed. Thank you.
Councillor Regis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just very briefly, I want to make clear that I fully support the principle of this motion and all the important things that have been raised in this discussion. But I also agree with the portfolio holder that we need to make sure we're signing the right type of document. And I agree with Councillor James that this does need to go to committee. So just to make sure this goes to committee and not in 1 minute belittling anything in this motion, because I agree with everything, I will vote against it, just to make sure it goes to committee.
I understand exactly why you're voting against, and it won't be held against you. Are we all in agreement on this? With one exception. It will be passed to the appropriate committee, which probably is...
And they need to sum up.
As a mover of the motion, if it helps, I think if CEP is willing to receive the motion, we should send it to CEP in that context, and I thank members for their support.
You have some summing up to do if you want it.
Thank you. That's perfectly fair in terms of what I've just said. The only thing I would say in terms of the emergency aspect to it, in talking to the agencies, one of the issues was related specifically to the housing role of the authority and how we can and what we can do there. So, I mean, there's plenty we can talk about, and I really do respect what you've said, so thank you. Thank you very much, members.
Could we have a vote, please?
It was agreed
to record this support. Thank you.
It was agreed by everybody with one exception, which takes it to committee, so we don't need a formal vote. Item 10, the minutes of the following meetings as listed. Are they all agreed? No questions, that's splendid. Moving on to item 11, questions from members on notice from Councillor Miss Edis.
As per the order paper, Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor, it is a pleasure to do so. Locally and nationally, the Conservatives had to pick up the pieces from years of Labour mismanagement. Through our long-term plan, the Conservatives are helping local people aspire, succeed and thrive, with lower bills, more jobs.
Please, can we have some quiet? Give the member the opportunity.
We all know that Britain can only have strong public services if we have a strong economy. We're delivering this through our long-term economic plan, with businesses flocking to our borough. John Lewis at Home, Waitrose, Network Rail, Lidl, Dunelm, Bombay Sapphire, Airkicks, and not forgetting, as the previous Cabinet member for coffee shops, Costa Coffee at the Leisure Park. Through this focus on the economy, unemployment has now fallen here by around 70%. That's more good jobs for local people. But that's not enough. The Conservatives are on the side of hard-working people, and it's very clear from the benches
Councillor,
that they are not.
Just hold on a moment. Councillor West?
Thank you. If somebody wants to declare an interest, one may do it any time. And, Mr Mayor, I'd just like to declare that I have absolutely no interest whatsoever.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor, and that shows that UKIP is also not on the side of hard-working people, because we have frozen the council tax again, 6 years at the same level, introduced 30-minute free parking in Basingstoke, invested in better broadband across the borough with more to come, and worked with the police to keep crime down. It's no wonder that 96% of residents are happy with the area in which they live, and over 70% of residents believe that the council is providing value for money. We're 11th out of 7,000 places to live in England and Wales. Why would anyone put this record at risk? Locally and nationally, it is a choice between the competence of David Cameron and the Conservatives, or the chaos of Ed Miliband and Labour, and the fact that none of them stick around to hear the facts shows they are afraid of the success that's happened under this government and this administration. Businesses want to come here, people want to live here, but no one wants Labour here.
You have a supplementary after that?
Might as well. Would you go further with me and agree, Councillor Geraldine, that it's down to this administration and our government that has made all those achievements possible?
Well, yes, Councillor Miss Eachus. Under this government and administration, we've seen massive commitment to invest in our infrastructure. The M3, the Black Dam roundabout, the A340, the A30, the list goes on. And I must not forget, despite Labour's unhealthy interest in Bramley, a place they hadn't heard of until they decided they wished to stop local improvements, significant investment across the borough through the Local Infrastructure Fund. Since its launch, the Local Infrastructure Fund has already allocated well over £1 million. That is a legacy I am proud of. In my last comments to the Council, let me say this. I will miss the discussions on the really big things, from the naming of parishes all the way through to the master planning of Manydown. I will miss being part of this forward-looking, successful administration, but I shan't miss, for 1 minute, the dirty politics of the Labour Party here in Basingstoke. Labour have turned toxic our politics, and the people of North Hampshire deserve better than Labour. On the 7th of May, they'll have their chance to say so, securing a better future with the Conservatives. For the last time, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I thought that was a really remarkable double act. I just knew right to know which of them was the straight man. Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not such an exciting subject. We're talking about recycling now, something which I think may happen on May the 7th. But as per the order paper, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Joint Waste Team appreciate the problems with communal bins and work with residents to avoid their efforts of recycling ending up in general waste, and will continue to do so to encourage more to recycle. The team have found that if a resident is keen to recycle and there is a continual problem with contamination, then we can issue them with clear sacks for recycling, which they can put out separately for collection. The crews were advised of this and will ensure that they are collected as recycling and not general waste. This is in operation at a number of sites in the borough at present. The waste client team have always sent a letter containing information to all new residents of the borough and will continue to do so with the new leaflet, cling and stickers on recycling. This information is provided to the team weekly by the Revenue and Benefits section. This year we have also asked residents for their email addresses when we have sent out the council tax bill. This gives them the opportunity to receive council news and information electronically, and it has already been agreed and discussed with officers that one of the key uses for this information will be able to give regular updates on recycling.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to thank the portfolio holder. I've had some discussions with residents, housing associations and management companies in relation to this problem and received quite a bit of feedback from them. I've looked at the new information packs that have been sent out, and they've been very wordy and don't have any clear pictures to tackle this particular problem. Even the information photos that are stuck on the bins themselves don't highlight it. I believe a couple of additional new stickers on the communal bins would help, especially if there is a language barrier. We also have to consider that any residents that come into the borough are highly likely to have come from local authorities that recycle differently to us, something that was very apparent in our recent meetings on recycling. One local authority which has an influx of new students in September each year are going to target the students with recycling information, and I don't see any difference between this and new residents moving into our area, and why we couldn't adopt something similar. I would ask the portfolio holder to please consider these options, as it is the residents that recycle properly that are most affected. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree that we always need to look at other ways to encourage residents to recycle, and it's all about education, and I take on board your comments and we'll take them back to the officer team, and as I say, we constantly keep it under review, and school children and students are a good area to target, so we will keep that under review, and thank you for your comments.
Question 3, Councillor Keith Watts.
As on the paper, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a comprehensive question for 10 o'clock at night, and you'll be pleased I have a comprehensive answer. No, I'm sorry. So it's in 3 parts, so I will take it in 3 parts, if I may. First part, this council acquired a 999-year lease with an agreement to develop Manidown for the proper planning of the area in February 1996. At that time, we also signed a joint agreement with HCC for the development of Manidown. Basingstoke and Deane therefore has a joint landowner interest in Manidown, and so it must ensure that those landowner interests are protected in order to ensure that this council, Basingstoke and Deane is consistent with the development powers that it used to purchase Manidown, which were supported by the full council motion in July 2012 to actively promote the Manidown project. Part 2, Basingstoke and Deane in its landowning capacity has already submitted representations to the various public consultations on the local plan, and in order to protect its landowning interests intends to continue with these representations at the local plan EIP. All of those representations were presented to and fully discussed in public sessions at the relevant Manidown Ofcom meetings and approved at the subsequent MEC meetings. Part 3, Basingstoke and Deane in its landowning capacity has not made any direct representations to vary the policy for 40% affordable housing in the emerging local plan, and will continue not to do so unless there are any representations from third parties on this policy that might compromise the landowning interests at Manidown. The council, in its landowning capacity, did support Hampshire County Council and its agent URS in reserving the right to discuss the implications of this policy on the viability of the Manidown project during the initial consultation by the LPA on the BDBC SIL Section 106 proposals in February 2014, but HCC and its agent URS did not make any further representation to the revised consultation by the LPA on the SIL Section 106 proposals in December 2014.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Cabinet Member. Can you tell me, is there a regular review of the contract of AECOM, and how is that reported to the Council?
I'm not aware that, of what the procedures are for the regular review of the contract. I would have to come back to you on that.
Question 4, Councillor Beerman.
You're censoring me now. Mr. Mayor, as per the order paper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No. The original response I gave was provided by officers, in fact from the procurement team, but following this further question from you, Councillor Beerman, I have checked again with the officer team, and they tell me that it would take perhaps even longer than I suggested at the Cabinet meeting, i.e. in excess of 120 days. I can give you chapter and verse on that if you wish, about the detailed procurement process, but perhaps I can do that outside of this meeting. Up to you.
Supplementary.
How's that? Right. Thank you there. I've lost my thread now, and with all those switchings. That's helpful, although I'm not sure that I would necessarily be able to follow that. What I'm concerned about is that the people who are affected by this have the opportunity, and if you were willing to give me the time, I might drop in, but I'd really like you to talk to them to explain why they are completely wrong, because they are absolutely sure that they could do the necessary, and they are not unfamiliar with tender processes. So I'm sure you agree with me, do you agree with me, that really we want to do all we can to help local companies, and that in this particular situation they have a good reason to believe that they have been badly let down, having done a lot of work, unrewarded financially, and then not at least being considered. They don't have an expectation of getting necessarily a contract, they have the expectation of being evaluated at least.
Yes, I did actually give in Cabinet the reasons why we took the decision on procurement for the £1 million worth of expenditure for solar panels, and that was because we needed to move quickly. We are open to providing opportunities for council contracts with local businesses, and the organisation you're referring to has won work in the past. The council leader at Cabinet reiterated our commitment and enthusiasm to working with local organisations. I'm very happy to sit down with the individuals concerned. We've had quite a few meetings with them over the past, but I'm very happy to sit down with them and explain to them in detail why the normal procurement routes unfortunately take as long as they do, but they do.
And question 5 from Councillor Bound.
As per the older paper, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I think it's probably better that the portfolio holder is responsible for this area should answer the question rather than myself. So it will be Councillor Mrs. Ossolt.
Pass it over.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In January 2014, the criteria used to determine priorities for the parking in residential area programme were revised, and at this time Council agreed to investigate, development and implement, wherever possible, parking solutions in those roads ranked 1 to 30. In the intervening 15 months, having consulted residents and secured the necessary consents, officers have implemented parking solutions in 2 of these roads, which has delivered an additional 34 parking spaces. Officers have also carried out public consultation on a further 5 projects and are actively working on solutions for these roads. They are also about to begin investigatory work at 8 or more locations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Supplementary.
Thank you. Bearing in mind the dearth of affordable housing in the borough, with children consequently unable to leave the parental home, but still owning cars that are parked on our already congested roads, would the portfolio holder not agree that a much larger sum needs to be invested to tackle the lengthening priority list for parking? And I can witness Priors Road in my own ward that has slipped down the list.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take that back to our team and we'll have a look at it, but we have the criteria is the 1 to 30. Thank you.
That concludes questions. There's nothing to discuss under items 12 and 13, but before you go, this being my last council meeting, I'd just like to thank councillors for having made this year so interesting, and council meetings being such fun, making sure tonight was a nice long one. So thank you for that. I would also like to thank those councillors who will not be standing in the May elections. I'd like to thank them for the service that they've given to this borough over many years in some cases, and for those councillors who are remaining, can we just give them a round of applause? And remember, it'll be your turn one day. Good night.